The gap is set at 532, so the settings will be slightly different for the root. Technique is roughly the same. Stay on the leading edge of that puddle, but not so far on the leading edge where you shoot wire through the backside. That's the ticket. For the fill pass, I increased the wire feed speed a little bit, and I want to wind up here about a 1/16 lower than flush. I need to be a 1/16 lower, or it's very easy to put the cover pass on there with too much reinforcement, and a lot of codes limit you to 1/8 of an inch maximum reinforcement on a cover pass. Letting it cool between the fill pass and the cover pass to where it's warm to the touch, I reduced the voltage just by a little bit and the wire feed just by a little bit as well, and I'm trying to move fairly quickly across the middle while holding the toes to prevent undercut. Now let's see how those techniques apply to a 6-inch Schedule 80 pipe. Same bevel angle except with a 1/8 gap. I'll be using a ESAB Rebel 205 here. This is the AC/DC one that TIG welds aluminum. It's got an inductance setting for the MIG, so I'm setting it a little bit higher than what it recommends. I'm going to try to weld from 12 o'clock all the way down to 6. I'll just be doing one side of this pipe today. I've got a tack at 12 and a tack at 6, and you could see earlier that I had a little area there where I was kind of dialing in some settings. But the same technique on the root pass. Keep that stick out fairly short. Keep on the front edge of the puddle. Make sure to have a really good solid ground. That makes a big difference when you're welding an open root pass. But don't stay so far on the leading edge of the puddle where you shoot wire through the inside. I took this test a long time ago at a fab shop I worked at, and it wasn't the higher end test. It was just a test that I needed to get, so that there was no pressure like there would be on a higher end. I wasn't like the job dependent on it. But for some reason, the instructor wanted me to go all the way from 12 all the way to 6, and then he wanted me to not even stop at 6 o'clock and turn around and weld all the way back up to 12. And I'll tell you, that's rough on the lower back if you've got any lower back issues. But I did it, and I did 2 or 3 practice joints, and I was ready for a test. So then when I got my test tacked up and got the inspector to come over and sign off on my fit up, I said, "So we're doing this the same way as you had me do earlier?" And he's like, "No, I'm just messing with you. You can go ahead and stop at 6 o'clock and rest." I also thought it was kind of weird that he didn't want any tacks at 3 and at 9 o'clock, but that's what the instructor called for. That's what I did. I came out a little flat on the overhead part of this. I think if I would have dropped my voltage a little bit and stayed a little bit more on the front of the puddle, that would have come out better. So for the fill pass, I'm going to bump it up to 19.5 volts and fairly low on the wire feed speed, 200. That's all going to depend on how big of a root you put in there. Just like the plate, I want to be about a 1/16 of an inch below flush before I put the cover pass on this thing. But I do want the fill pass to wet out. I want to make sure that I don't have any cold lap between this pass and the root pass. And sometimes it's just best to live with a little bit of spatter and have the pass lay down a little bit flatter. I prefer having my wire feed speed set to where I don't have much spatter at all, but you can see I've got a bit here. Part of that's gun angle, but part of it is only 200 inches a minute wire feed speed. But it is kind of laying in there pretty good. Partly due to some pretty good settings, but partly that sort of rainbow technique that I'm using. And the reason I'm doing that is because it kind of traces the leading edge of the puddle. So it's sort of an upside down U or a rainbow or whatever. It's just the shape of the leading edge of the puddle. And it sweeps the arc across the leading edge. And then I back up a little bit, which kind of helps fill in the toes and helps keep it flat across the surface, which makes the next pass go in a little bit better. I shouldn't have to grind this at all before the next pass. At the end of the video, I will do a cut and etch, a cross-section test, just to make sure that we don't have any lack of fusion between passes or any voids or anything like that. I'm in pretty good shape here as far as being a little bit below flush. It's always a good idea to snip your wire and to clean out the spatter in between passes. The last thing you want to do is dump a donut of spatter when things are going really good. All right, for the cover pass, It's almost like welding a bead on flat plate, so you don't need as much heat. You're not filling up any kind of a groove or anything. So I'm reducing both wire feed speed and voltage, 18 volts, 180 inches a minute, and we'll see how that works. Taking a few dry runs here again, get comfortable, know what I'm up against. Try to keep the gun angle straight in toward the center of the pipe. It's especially important on the bottom. I'm moving pretty quickly across the middle again and pausing on the toes. And it occurs to me on the bottom of this thing, I probably should have let the pipe cool for 5 to 10 minutes before coming on the cover pass like this. You don't want the pipe to be too hot. It's just hard to control the metal. You can always compensate by using really low settings, but I'd rather let the pipe cool off a little bit. And I'm kind of fighting it here, and it's not coming out as pretty as it should. It's a little irregular because I'm kind of having to just really scoot across that middle. So I'm going to stop here and let it cool for a few minutes. Let's get back on it. It's still very warm to the touch, but not quite as hot as it was before. Things should go a whole lot better. Not having to go quite as fast across the middle, still not wasting any time there. I can just tell it's just a whole lot more controllable. I didn't change anything as far as the settings go. I just let it cool off a little bit. And of course I'm getting to the easier part of the pipe too. Once you get up to the, to the 9 o'clock position or the 3 o'clock position, things are just easier than they are on the bottom anyway. But generally speaking, if you let the pipe cool, you can make it look just as good on the bottom as you can on the sides and on the top. Again, trying to point that gun toward the center of the pipe. I don't want to get carried away with the gun angle. A little bit of push, not a problem. You just don't want to get completely out of scope. And it's easy to get out of scope on the top of the pipe. So the way to get around that is just chicken wing that elbow and point it toward the sky. Get it up good and high when you're on the top. It'll keep you with a good angle at 12 o'clock. Now I know there's going to be some people asking why I didn't weld the root uphill. It just goes in really good downhill with a gap and with no land and with a 30-degree bevel. But we're going to do a cutting edge anyway. We'll just do a little cross section here. We'll only takes a minute. These Walter zip disc wheels make short work of this. So in just a few minutes, I'm going to have a nice little section here that I can look at, I can polish, I can put some acid etch on there, and we'll see if there's any voids in between the root and the fill and the cover pass. This cross section was taken around the 9 o'clock position, so that was kind of one of the better, easier positions, but I don't see any problems there. Nothing jumps out at me as being a problem. I don't see any voids, I don't see any straight lines. This is why I like to do the cut and etch test, especially right after I weld something while it's still fresh in my mind, because one test is worth 100 opinions.